To teach his spoiled son a lesson, a hotel owner hires an entire movie production crew to make him believe he traveled back in time. Louis arrives with his entourage at his father's hotel and demands to have the best suite. With no choice, the staff forces another guest to leave their suite to give it to Louis and his friends. Immediately, the group goes wild, partying while wrecking the place. One of Louis' friends later brings in a wallaby for his pet panther. Seeing the wild animal, the wallaby leaps off the balcony and lands in the hotel pool. The panther follows it, and the other guests are horrified to see the animal attack its prey, while Louis and his group cheer on. The news of the incident spread the next day, leading animal rights activists to protest against the hotel. With the company's reputation tarnished, the board of directors considers firing Louis' father, Jean-François. Furious, Jean-François heads to Louis's suite, which is still filled with drunk partygoers. He then wakes his son and berates him. He points out that if he loses his position as the president of the hotel, Louis won't get away with partying there anymore. However, Louis dismisses his concerns, so his angered father storms off. That night, Jean-François rants to his wife, Hélène, about Louis, lamenting how he'd tried to send his son to different specialists to make him behave. Hélène thinks he needs to spend more time with her stepson, but Jean-François claims he has no time, especially now that his job is in danger. The next day, Jean-François heads to his new hotel where they're shooting an ad. There, the director, Chris, complains about the model's lackluster acting. As his staff passes by, Chris comes up with an idea and whispers something to the boom operator. They begin rolling again, and they watch as the actress walks into one of the bedrooms and gasps upon seeing the boom operator in ridiculously revealing attire. This finally gives Chris the expression he wanted for his ad. Jean-François reminds him that the actress might sue him for this, but Chris thinks to push someone to be better, they don't need to ask permission. Soon after, Jean-François hops into his helicopter to leave, but as they ascend, he notices the hotel's expansive landscape and comes up with an idea. He then returns to the hotel and offers Chris a chance to make his own film. On another night, Louis steps out of a bar, only to find that his car is being towed. He chases after the tow truck, only to get shot by a tranquilizer dart. Louis eventually wakes up to the sound of a bell. Before he can process his surroundings, a man hoists him out of bed, urging him to hurry. The man, Sylvain, warns him that their boss will beat him if he finds him still asleep. Just then, Bavelin storms in and throws a bucket at Louis, ordering him to attend to their Viscount. Before he can hit Louis, Sylvain begs mercy, so Bavelin throws him against the wall for speaking out of turn. Bavelin continues beating Sylvain, scaring Louis. He then orders the confused man to get the bucket and go to work. Frightened, Louis takes the bucket and runs out. To his surprise, he finds himself in a medieval village. Bavelin then steps out, so Louis runs towards the nearby estate. There, he finds the Viscount speaking to Dr. Celestin about his stomach problems. Just then, he feels the call of nature, so Celestin orders Louis to prepare the bucket. With Louis still confused, Bavelin helps him set up the bucket for the Viscount. The Viscount then does his business, while Louis watches in disgust. After the deed, Celestin checks the bucket's contents and reports to the Viscount that his health is improving. This has the men celebrating, but Louis questions why they're happy about his bowel movement. He insists that this is just an elaborate prank, so he runs off to escape. However, he reaches the edge of the village and finds that it's surrounded by wolves. Scared, he runs back to the village but gets chased by a group of dogs. He eventually gets cornered, and the dog's owner and the Viscount's son, Estienne, arrive. He drags Louis back into the estate to punish him for running away from his father. Louis tries to negotiate by announcing that his father can pay for his release, but Estienne ridicules the idea. Just then, Estienne's sister, Isabeau, arrives to stop her brother. She reminds him that Louis has been serving them for 15 years, something that confuses Louis further. Still, Estienne insists on punishing the man, but before he can do so, the Viscount complains about the noise they're making. Isabeau uses the chance to convince her father to let Louis live, and the Viscount reminds his son that since his mother passed away, they've lacked compassion in the village, so they need to start showing mercy. Defeated, Estienne backs off. Unbeknownst to Louis, the production crew has set up camp not far from the fake village. Using camera drones camouflage as a bird, along with hidden cameras, Chris and Jean-François watch the events unfold. Jean-François is concerned that Louis might get hurt, but Chris insists that they need to put pressure on his son to convince him that he had truly traveled back in time. He assures him that Louis will soon force himself to adapt to his new environment, thus giving him a chance to change his ways. Outside their tent, the actors playing Isabeau, the Viscount, and Bavelin are on their break. The actor playing Estienne then meets with his girlfriend and the production's horse trainer, Lisa. Later, Louis is in the estate kitchen where Sylvain works. At the director's order, Bavelin walks in and orders Louis to help out in the kitchen. With no choice, Louis peels potatoes with Sylvain, rambling about how he's experiencing something like in Back to the Future. Sylvain laughs at this, making Louis ask if he knows the movie. This makes Sylvain, Chris, and Jean-François nervous, and thankfully, the actor claims that he laughed since the idea of going back to a future sounded ridiculous. Louis continues to theorize that he might have gotten hit by a car and transported into the past. This convinces him that if he gets hit by a car again, he'll be returned to his timeline. With this idea, he heads out and throws himself in front of a wheelbarrow. This doesn't work, so Louis races towards a horse carriage and knocks himself out. Jean-François and Chris get scared that he'd gotten seriously hurt. Fortunately, Louis eventually wakes up, so the show goes on. In the next few days, Louis tries to adapt to his new environment, even learning how to be more responsive to the Viscount's needs. He even abandons the idea of escaping, afraid of the wolves in the forest. Seeing that his son's new therapy is successful, Jean-François soon invites Hélène to show her their progress. She watches the camera feed with them, mistaking that they've hired Louis as an actor. Later on, Isabeau pretends to cry to draw Louis's attention. She rants to him about the Viscount setting her up to marry a wealthy but old man. Isabeau comments that she'd rather have a man her age, even if he's just a servant. Despite her flirting, Louis advises her to marry the old man since he'll likely die soon. Then she'll inherit his wealth. He then leaves to attend to his duties. Once he's gone, Isabeau looks to the camera to speak to Chris. She's confused as to why Louis isn't attracted to her, and the director assumes that the man just has no compassion. Jean-François defends that his son is used to women throwing themselves at him, so Isabeau's flirting had no effect. Hearing this, Hélène realizes that the entire production is an elaborate attempt to educate Louis. Jean-François reminds her that she advised him to spend more time with Louis, so he'll be watching over his son until he changes his ways. However, Hélène doesn't see this as spending time with his son. Their argument is interrupted when they hear Isabeau struggling with her horse. Afraid that the situation might blow their cover, Chris sends Lisa in. Soon enough, Lisa arrives in costume to calm the horse. However, as she alights her horse, Louis spots her modern undergarments. Surprised, Louis tackles the woman and checks her clothes. He freezes when he catches a glimpse between her legs before Lisa kicks him off. She then walks away, having removed her undergarment before Louis could see it again. Having seen enough, Hélène reminds her husband that people aren't toys for him to play with. She then storms off, but Jean-François chases after her, declaring that something changed in their son. Back in the tent, they watch as Louis asks another servant about the horse trainer, wanting to apologize for disgracing her. With Chris instructing the actor through an earpiece, the man tells Louis that Lisa is the blacksmith's daughter who takes care of the Viscount's horses. Because of this development, Lisa is prepped for her new role, though she insists that she's not an actress. Chris assures her that she just has to accept Louis's apology, then she can go. Soon enough, Louis visits Lisa and apologizes for looking at her body. According to the customs he's learned from the others, a woman who's been seen by another man won't be an eligible bride anymore. Thus, he feels guilty for seeing her that way. Lisa just tells him to stay away from her before heading back to her makeshift house. Watching this improvement in Louis delights Chris and Jean-François. Even Hélène considers that this might be the way to teach her stepson some humility. Later, Chris tells the parents that he plans to give Louis a romantic interest to help him transition into being a hero. He and Jean-François have already chosen Isabeau for this, but Hélène points out that Louis likes Lisa instead. Jean-François laughs at this, believing that his son is into seductive women like Isabeau. However, Hélène reminds them how Louis reacted to seeing Lisa, believing that he fell in love with her at first sight. Chris is unconvinced, so he continues plotting to get Louis closer to Isabeau. On another day, the villagers gather for an annual holiday. However, Louis isn't impressed by the gathering, so he teaches the musicians a modern song. He then starts a conga line with the other villagers. Isabeau catches up to Louis, telling him that she wants to join the festivities. However, he ignores her. Instead, he later searches for Lisa, proving his stepmother's theory that he likes the horse trainer better. To get Louis back to his storyline, Sylvain tells Louis that Isabeau has been crying, but the man just asks about Lisa again. With this, Sylvain tells Louis that the trainer is by the river. When he gets there, however, Louis finds Isabeau instead, pretending to attempt to drown herself in the river. He saves her, and she claims that she was trying to escape her engagement. He carries the woman back home, but she refuses to be seen by her father. Instead, Louis takes her into one of the carriages. Chris thinks Louis will finally fall for Isabeau. However, the man simply shuts the carriage door on the woman and leaves. Hélène, again, points out that Louis isn't interested, and the angry director sarcastically offers her his job since she seems to know better. To his surprise, Hélène actually takes his headphones and instructs the staff to prepare Lisa. That evening, Louis finds Lisa outside her home, claiming that she didn't want to go to the holiday. Louis admits that parties in the 21st century are cooler, but when she doesn't react to this, he shrugs that she doesn't believe him. Upon Hélène's instructions, Lisa tells Louis that she wants to believe him. This encourages Louis to tell her more about the modern era. He continues his stories throughout the night, leading to him talking about how in airplanes, the wealthy and the others are separated. When Lisa asks what he meant by the others, Louis explains that they're those who have to work and save just to be able to fly. He then talks about public transportation and makes fun of how it must stink to use them. This pisses Lisa off, so she reminds him that his job is to clean the bucket where the Viscount does his business. She then walks off, leaving Louis stunned. The next day, Lisa apologizes to Helene for berating her stepson. She reasons that she's met plenty of wealthy men because of her job, and she sees them as nothing but spoiled. Still, Helene believes Louis can be saved, so she asks Lisa to help teach him how to love someone more than himself. Meanwhile, Chris fumes that Helene has taken over. Jean-Francois assures him that he still owns the project, so he begs the director to work with his wife. With this, Chris considers officially hiring Helene as a consultant. He also starts integrating Lisa into his official cast. However, Estienne is concerned about getting his girlfriend involved. He asserts that the film industry will take advantage of Lisa's innocence, but his reaction makes her wonder if he's just bothered that her role is more important than his. That night, Louis asks Sylvain for advice. He worries that he hurt Lisa's feelings, so he wants to make up for it. Hearing this, Sylvain advises him to do a bear dance for Lisa. He then demonstrates this dance, which ends up being more suggestive than Louis expected. Afterward, Sylvain advises him to also read a poem for Lisa. Otherwise, she might prefer a real bear over him. The next day, Louis approaches Lisa and starts with his poem. He then turns the poem into a song which he dances to. Lisa and the others are delighted by his efforts, so Louis thanks Sylvain that night for his advice. Late that night, Jean-Francois approaches his sleeping son. Sylvain sees him, reminding him that he can't be there. Jean-Francois assures the actor that his son won't be awakened, but Louis actually wakes upon hearing his father's voice. Quickly, Sylvain knocks Louis out while Chris pulls the father away. Thankfully, the next morning, Louis is convinced that he just saw his father in a dream. For the next sequence, Bavelin reports to the Viscount that Estienne and his friends destroyed their inn during a drunken party. They even brought a wolf to eat a lamb in front of the other guests. Louis overhears this and reminisces about the time they bought a wallaby for his panther. Bavelin continues that the king visits their inn for his private matters. If he finds out that it's been thrashed, the king will demand Estienne to be punished. Because of this, the Viscount later invites Louis to a meal, only to ask him to pretend to be Estienne so he'd receive the king's punishment instead. He offers a generous reward, including a bride of his choosing. The latter offer makes him consider as he thinks about Lisa. With this, Louis accepts the deal and gets sent to a public flogging, though the executioner just puts him on his lap to hit him. Despite this, however, Estienne calls Louis and insists on not letting him have Lisa. He throws the man back, asserting that Lisa belongs to him. Jean-Francois is surprised by this, and Chris admits that Estienne is improvising. This makes Helene worry that the actor is making this personal. Despite Estienne threatening him, Louis suddenly stands up to the man. However, instead of fighting for his love, he backs off, much to Chris's disappointment. Helene assures them that this is good, since Louis has finally seen a reflection of his own attitude. She believes that her stepson wonders if he actually deserves the reward, which means he'll finally start considering the consequences of his actions. As if to prove her right, Louis later asks Lisa if it bothers her that he's a lowly servant. She advises him not to reduce himself based on his job. Instead, she encourages him to keep going so he can return to his time. This uplifts his spirits, so Louis later prepares a candlelight dinner for Lisa to show his gratitude. The two begin spending more time together. But one day, Louis notices one of the birds flying strangely. This is actually one of the drones that got out of control, so Chris orders Lisa to distract Louis. With no choice, Lisa grabs Louis and kisses him. Louis returns the gesture but apologizes when he senses her hesitation. Chris and Jean-Francois rejoice to see how Louis has truly changed. However, Helene orders them to stop the project now before Lisa and Louis actually fall in love. She reminds them that they shouldn't manipulate people's real emotions, but Chris insists on continuing his masterpiece. With this, Helene threatens to leave Jean-Francois if he doesn't stop this now. In turn, Chris argues that he'd be abandoning his son if they stopped. Seeing her husband hesitate, a disappointed Helene storms off. Chris remains unbothered by this as he starts plotting Louis's heroic moment. However, Jean-Francois realizes that the director is more interested in his film than in helping his son, so he orders him to end the project now. When he leaves, however, Chris ignores his instructions and proceeds with the next stage. Soon enough, Sylvain tells Louis that the Vikings are terrorizing their village. Louis thinks they should run away, but Sylvain reminds him that Lisa is back in the village. This convinces him to head to the estate where the supposed Vikings, led by Arnold, order them to surrender a woman to be his wife. Arnold then chooses Lisa, but instead of saving her, a terrified Louis leaves. He walks back home in shame until he sees one of the birds again. Reminded of his kiss with Lisa, Louis rides a horse back to the estate, attacking the Vikings along the way, much to the actor's surprise. Afraid of getting hit, Arnold surrenders Lisa, so she and Louis ride off into the woods. Witnessing this, Chris declares that this is the first time cinema changed a person's life. Meanwhile, Jean-Francois chases after Hélène to apologize to her. However, Louis and Lisa end up on the same road, with the man seeing the cars around. This convinces Hélène that her husband is continuing the project, so she leaves. Before Louis can process what happened, someone shoots him with a tranquilizer dart. Not long after, Louis goes back to his normal life, having been told that he was in a coma after getting hit by a car. The experience, however, truly changed Louis, as he feels disconnected from his life, despite recovering his freedom and wealth. One night, Louis meets his father, who stepped down from his company. Now that he has time to spend, Jean-Francois has been lonely without Hélène. In turn, Louis talks about falling in love with Lisa during his coma dream. He reminds his father that at least Hélène is real, so he can win her back. Guilty about lying to his son, Jean-Francois decides to drive Louis to a ranch the next day. To his surprise, Louis sees Lisa there, allowing them to reunite. Soon, she takes Louis to his father's hotel, where they built the fake village, allowing them to form a real life together, without the lies. Jean-Francois also attempts to make amends with Hélène. Meanwhile, Chris creates a new production company where they create fake scenarios to change real people for the better.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.